And so may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. The gospel readings for today are stories of being lost and being found. And I'm sure that you have heard 100 sermons on these parables over the years. I'm pretty certain that I have delivered 100 of them. And I think we preach on them so often because it's a feeling we can all identify with, right? That feeling of being lost. And yet these stories are about more than just being lost. They are also about being found and the celebration that accompanies our restoration. I don't know about you, but it feels like I am a little lost right now. Still isolated as a result of COVID-19, still separated from family and community, although that is lessening more and more each day and each week that passes. Overwhelmed by the news of First Nations communities and the affirmation of so many unidentified graves. Mourning for creation and wildfires that just rage, touching even us with the smoke that crosses across our country. Despair over the hate that rises up in people's hearts and spills over into acts of aggression and violence. Yes, I feel a little lost, and maybe you do too. Maybe you feel lost. Or maybe you know that you are lost, isolated from loved ones, separated from community, feeling threatened, unsafe, questioning your security and your comfort. Maybe in the midst of this pandemic and this strange world that we are living in, maybe we are all just waiting to be found, hoping to be found, seeking to be found, longing to be restored to community, to safety and security. Part of the problem is that we're not just feeling this as individuals, but our families and our social structures are also feeling lost. As we glimpse the possibility of returning to worship, as we begin to gather again slowly and smallly, these parables feel familiar. Reading these stories 18 months into a global pandemic has brought to mind many questions for me. What have we lost during this pandemic? What have we been seeking? What do we hope to find? How will we celebrate the return of the people to the fold? These are not just practical questions. These are deeply theological questions. They ask us to consider where God is, even in the midst of those times when we feel most alone, when we feel most isolated. They ask us to lament, to remember the joy in the community, to name our hurt, to name our fear, our anxiety, and above all, to trust that God can handle hearing them. To know that even when we feel anger, even when we feel alone or afraid or lost, that we truly are never alone. They ask us to name our needs, our selfishness, our self-interest, our self-preservation, all of our needs before the sacred listener. And we are invited to name the needs of those that we love and the needs of our aching world and God's beautiful creation. These questions ask us to hope, to remember the promise of God that we are never alone. It's strange to read this passage and think over the past 18 months or so, we have lost so much. There's the lost coin of celebrating milestones together, the lost coin of community, the lost coin of lives, so many lives that will not be restored to community. I also think of the things that congregations have lost, the lost coin of communication and the lost coin of vibrancy, of connection, of community that works together as a family. I'm certain that you can name your own losses personally and for the churches that you love so dearly. Yes, many of us are feeling lost, and a definition of lost is so much bigger than geography or place. It is bigger than that lone wolf stranded halfway down a cliff, perched on a precipice. It is bigger than the coin scooched way down deep into a couch cushion or nestled under an appliance. Feeling lost includes a sense of being unable to be found. That's where the fear comes from, of no longer being able to find your way, of not knowing where to go, of feeling no longer held or a part of something. And all of this encompasses so much of the reality that we have faced as people during this pandemic. It has been difficult, and experts remind us that what we are living through is trauma. So yes, the idea of lostness probably feels very familiar, even as we begin to imagine being found. Maybe that nearness of celebration, maybe the nearness of thinking that we will be found, that we will be restored to community, is actually making it that much harder. I wonder about when we are restored to community. I wonder how we will celebrate, how we will mourn what we have lost, how we will remember this time, and how we will call the community together, and how we will rejoice. I wonder about those who will never return, about what that will mean for our community and how we will mourn them well. I wonder about those who felt lost before the pandemic. Perhaps this is the more important question for us to consider. And once we are found, once we are restored to community, once the celebration begins, who will continue to be lost? And how do we address the lostness of the world around us? What is the call of God on our hearts to find others? I wonder what we will feel like celebrating. I wonder whether we will be brave enough to celebrate, and whether we will celebrate returning or new life. Returning has a sense of going back to who we were, but returning and finding new life, that is filled with hope and possibility. These stories are about being lost and being found, but they are also about the persistence of the seeker and the joy of being found. And in their quiet and seemingly innocuous way, they invite us to transformation of hearts and of minds and of behavior. As we think about returning to the fold, I hope we do not move too quickly from the feeling of being lost to the comfort of being found. I hope we do not simply celebrate our return, our foundness. I encourage us to seek the lost. How hard will we do that? How daring will we be in seeking out the other, in offering camaraderie, acceptance, and friendship? As much as we need to be found, as much as we need to be restored to community, how much greater the need for those who felt lost before the pandemic? How scandalous are we willing to be? Losing and finding and remembering are important. They're faithful acts. They are biblical acts. We need to do that for ourselves. We need to ponder the things that we have lost, the things that we have valued. We need to celebrate the things that we have found in the midst of this pandemic. And we need to remember the relentlessness of God, so that when life erupts around us again and we feel lost, we will have the memory of the Holy Seeker to accompany us through those times. This is grace, a grace that needs to be lived out, a grace that needs to be shared, a grace that is greater than you or I or us together. This is a preposterous grace, a foolish, risky, nonsensical grace, a grace that is ours to receive. Thanks be to God. A grace that is ours to give. May it be so. Amen.